Hasbro, the Dark Titan, stands victorious over the fabled wizards of the coast, once heroic stewards of the land, now unwilling subjects, forced to labour in service of its unquenchable greed. In the fetid depths of Hasbro's corporate fortress, the deep magic of Dungeons and Dragons is assailed, ripped asunder and reanimated as Hasbro strives to remake the very foundations upon which their world stands. No longer a force for good, for openness, inclusivity, and infinite creativity. Instead, a parody of the virtues it once embodied, bound forever to Hasbro's corporate control. Greetings and welcome. I'm Dave, the AI Wizard, and today, in addition to overly dramatic introductions that exist largely as an excuse to make fancy AI-generated art, we're going to find out what other role-playing game systems ChatGPT knows well enough to act as a game master's, referee's, or indeed storyteller's assistant for preparing and running games. With D&D teetering on the brink, and no, OGL 1.2 is not good, and no one should accept any new OGL that still attempts to deauthorise the original OGL 1.0a, you may be thinking it's time to try another role-playing system. And of course, for me, an important part of that choice is how well ChatGPT and GPT-3 knows those systems and their settings. Due to my pathological need to read almost everything the AI generates, and to keep these videos manageable, I'll cover 2 or 3 alternatives in each video. Today, we're going to look at a direct descendant of D&D and an edgy cousin that I have a particular fondness for. First up, it's the biggie, Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Almost certainly the biggest fantasy RPG after Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder 1st Edition, a child of D&D 3rd Edition and the original OGL, almost unseated D&D once before when D&D's 4th Edition went down like a lead balloon. Obviously, D&D 5th Edition corrected that mistake, and clearly seeing something in the 5th Edition design, Paizo, developers of Pathfinder, followed up with their own 2nd Edition based in large part on 5th Edition D&D, and of course, the OGL 1.0a license, albeit with a number of interesting innovations and a lot more detailed and expansive rules. But how well does ChatGPT know Pathfinder? Well, let's find out. For each system, I'm going to give it the same set of 3 chat prompts to try and get an idea of how familiar ChatGPT is with it. This first prompt will hopefully give us an idea of how well it knows the mechanics of the system. We will be creating content for Pathfinder 2e. Please write a short example of play for the system, including some dice rolls and mechanics the system is known for. The party of adventurers, consisting of a human fighter, an elf wizard, and a halfling rogue, very generic, are making their way through a dark and treacherous dungeon. As they round a corner, they come face to face with a group of goblins. The fighter, being the closest to the goblins, declares that he will attack. He rolls a d20 and adds his attack bonus. Let's say it's +6 to the roll. The roll comes up as 14, which, when added to his bonus, results in a total of 20. This is enough to hit the goblin's AC, armor class of 15, so the fighter deals damage. He rolls a d8, the damage die for his weapon, and gets a 6, dealing 6 points of damage to the goblin. Very good so far. I mean, this is all very standard Dungeons & Dragons D20 style role-playing. The wizard, seeing an opportunity to unleash her magic, casts a fireball spell. She rolls a d20 and adds her spell attack bonus. The roll comes out as a 12, which when added to her bonus results in a 17, also enough to beat the armor class. Okay, good. The rogue, being the most agile of the party, decides to sneak attack the goblin. She rolls a d20, adds her attack bonus. The roll comes out as 18, which when added to her bonus results in 26, hits the goblin. She adds an extra 2d6 damage to her attack. She rolls 2d6 and gets 4 and a 6, dealing 10 extra points of damage to the goblin. The goblin is now at 0 hit points and is defeated. The party continues on their adventure, ready to face whatever challenges come their way. That's actually pretty good, albeit the AI might be channeling Rimmer from Red Dwarf just very slightly.
I threw a 5 and a 2.
There are a couple of issues, though. There is no indication the AI understands Pathfinder's action economy. Instead, it reads, to me, more or less exactly like standard old-school D20 play. which may mean it's confused about the edition, or perhaps it just doesn't know, and so it's falling back on the closest thing that it does know. But honestly, it's close enough. I don't think it matters. We're not talking about the AI having to play the DM here for Pathfinder. So long as it understands the basic principles which Pathfinder shares with D&D, I think it'll work fine. And I'm more interested generally in how well it knows these other role-playing games' settings and sort of themes and style, rather than specifically the mechanics. So, let's move on to the second prompt then. Generate an interesting NPC the players might be travelling with. Provide a short backstory referencing some interesting locations within the Pathfinder 2e setting, some equipment they're carrying, ability scores, stats, and any other mechanical character details the system calls for. End with a line of sample dialogue for the NPC. Galadriel Gala da Madani. Wow, that's quite a name. Obviously, it's half-inch from Lord of the Rings, but that does happen occasionally. Race, half-elf, class, bard. Backstory. Galadriel, or Gala for short, that's cool, so that's actually a shortening. Galadriel, or Gala for short, was born in the bustling city of Absalon, the city at the centre of the world. That is indeed a location in Pathfinder. Her mother was a renowned bard from the De Madani family, one of the most prominent bardic families in the city, known for their performances in the famous Grand Opera. Her father, an elf from the distant land of Kyanin, was a member of the prestigious Arcananium, a magical academy located in the city. Gala grew up surrounded by music and magic, and it was only natural for her to follow in her mother's footsteps and become a bard herself. After completing her training in the Bardic College, Gala set out on a journey to explore the world and hone her skills. She has travelled to the distant land of Varisia, the rugged Stovall Plateau, and the exotic jungles of the Mwangi Expanse. Along the way, she has collected a wide variety of instruments and magical items, including a magical lyre that enhances her performances and a ring of protection that grants her +1 bonus to armor class. Ability scores: charisma, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, strength. I mean, they're in a weird order, but those are obviously the standard Dungeons & Dragons and indeed Pathfinder ability scores, 18, 14, 12, 12, 10, 8. It has given the standard modifiers for these, which is interesting and good. I don't know if those were in 1st edition Pathfinder or not. Definitely they're in 2nd edition Pathfinder. Stats: AC 14 with a ring of protection +1, hit points 22, attack bonus +4, charisma modifier, spell attack bonus +4, charisma modifier. Interestingly, it's given her her attack bonus of +4 is based on her charisma. Spell attacks, sure. Main attacks, I don't think that's the way it works. Gala is also proficient in several skills, including persuasion, performance, and deception. Sample dialogue. Ah, the road is long and weary, but the music and the stories make it all worth it. I have a new song that I've been working on. Would you like to hear it? So, not perfect, pretty good. I love the backstory, the details. Clearly ChatGPT knows a lot about the world of Pathfinder, which is extremely useful if you're generating an adventure set within that world. You would have to be a little bit careful, especially with regard to things like ability scores. I'm not sure it would be able to generate NPCs quite as robustly as it can do for D&D 5th edition, but definitely it'll still get you 90% of the way there, which is pretty good. All right, now the final test. We're going to try and get it to generate a whole encounter description. Once again, we're going to probe its knowledge of the system, the world, and all the rest of it. So here's our final prompt. We're creating an encounter in Pathfinder 2e. It is for a group of new player characters who stumble upon a creature or creatures attacking someone on the road while traveling between towns. The creature or creatures should be selected from the existing creatures of the game system. Write a short introduction to the encounter to read to the players. Include details of the towns the group are traveling between, which should be selected from the official campaign setting of the system, a brief bit of local history, and a description of the creature or creatures as they launch their ambush. Finish by listing the stats, abilities, and any loot. To a certain extent, the longer, the bolder, the more detailed your prompts, often the better response that you get from ChatGPT. The group of new player characters are travelling on the road between the towns of Sandpoint and Magnimar. Sandpoint, located on the lost coast of Varisia, is a small town known for its lumber and fishing industries. Magnimar, on the other hand, is a bustling city located on the coast and known for its impressive monuments and architectural wonders. As the players are making their way along the road, they notice a commotion ahead. As they get closer, they see a group of travellers is under attack by a pack of goblinoids. The goblinoids, led by a bugbear, are ambushing the travellers in an attempt to steal their valuables. The goblinoids are fierce and violent creatures, standing about 4 feet tall and weighing around 100 pounds. They have a greenish-grey skin and sharp teeth. They are armed with crude weapons such as short swords, hand axes and javelins. The bugbear is a larger and more formidable goblinoid, standing around 7 feet tall and weighing around 400 pounds. It has a shaggy brown fur and wields a giant club. The players should note that these goblinoids are not only looking for loot, but for captives to take back to their warren, where they will be used as food, or for other cruel purposes. It is recommended that the players act fast to defend the travellers and stop the goblinoids. I mean, that's pretty dark. I'm impressed, ChatGPT. I'm impressed with how brutal you can be. So, we've got their armor class, we've got their hit points, their attack bonus, and the damage they do. Honestly, I mean, that would be enough if you just wanted to run a quick encounter, if you just wanted ChatGPT, something unexpected had happened and you needed to quickly run something. You could do it with just those details. Bugbear, higher armor class, a lot more hit points, attack bonus +6, damage 2d8, giant club. Again, pretty good. Not perfect. Let me just double check these locations. Sandpoint is known as the Light of the Lost Coast and is a small town in southwestern Varisia under the influence of the city of Magnimar to the south. This is great. So basically, Sandpoint and Magnimar, definitely cities or locations within Pathfinder 2nd Edition's world of Golarion, and indeed they are next to each other. They make sense as a place where people would be travelling between. That itself is pretty impressive. So I think overall we can say that ChatGPT is very capable of generating Pathfinder content. It's probably better at the settings stuff than it is about the mechanics. It's also probably going to get a bit confused because of the similarity to 5th edition. You'll probably get 5th edition stuff sort of leaking in there that it'll riff off of. 5th edition and Pathfinder are similar enough that actually you can pretty much design a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition adventure and just port it to Pathfinder. But for now, I think we'll call that a success. Pathfinder 2nd edition, as a game system, I can highly recommend it. As somebody, if you're somebody who wants to move away from Dungeons & Dragons because of recent events, but you still want to stick with a system that's very similar to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, then Pathfinder 2nd edition is a great choice. It's a great option. Fantastic. Right, let's move on to the next role-playing system. The second RPG we're going to look at today stays in the fantasy genre, but moves far away from both the mechanics and tone of D&D. Although D&D was technically my first role-playing game, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, or WHFRP, as perhaps only I pronounce it, was where I really cut my role-playing and game mastering teeth. Set, of course, in Games Workshop's iconic medieval fantasy old world, rich in detailed factions and lore, it is probably one of the most detailed and evocative settings to play in. So I'm interested to see how well ChatGPT is able to capture that unique detail and style. Mechanically, it's completely different from D&D, being based on a percentile system, which I won't go into the details here. Dungeon Craft did a great video on it, which I'll link in the description, and I'm sure there are plenty of other videos out there if you want to find out more about the system. Instead, let's just jump straight into the prompts. Same as before, we will be creating content for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, WHFRP, 4th edition. Please write a short example of play for the system, including some dice rolls and mechanics the system is known for. The group of adventurers has just entered a dark, damp cave in search of treasure. As they move deeper into the cave, they come across a group of goblins. Player 1, playing a dwarf warrior, declares he will charge forward and attack the nearest goblin with his axe. The GM, Games Master, asks for a roll of the player's weapon skill characteristic, which is a characteristic that determines their proficiency with weapons. Obviously, the player rolls a D100, two 10-sided dice, and gets a total of 75. The GM checks the dwarf's weapon skill of 70 and sees that the roll is successful. The GM then asks for a roll on the player's strength characteristic, which is used to determine the damage dealt in combat. The player rolls a d10, a 10-sided die, and gets a 7. The GM adds the strength characteristic of the dwarf, 4, and the damage dealt by the weapon, 2, for a total of 13 damage dealt to the goblin. Player 2, playing a human wizard, decides to cast a spell to aid the dwarf in combat. The GM asks for a roll on the player's intelligence characteristic, which is used to determine the success of spellcasting. The player rolls a d100 and gets a total of 85, which is greater than the intelligence characteristic of the wizard, so the spell is successful. Player 3, playing a human rogue, decides to sneak up on another goblin and attempt to backstab it. The GM asks for a roll on the player's stealth characteristic, which is used to determine the success of sneaking up on enemies. It's getting very formulaic here. The player rolls a d100 and gets a total of 65, which is greater than the stealth characteristic of the rogue, so the rogue successfully sneaks up to the goblin. The GM then asks for a roll on the player's weapon skill characteristic to determine the damage dealt by the backstab. The player rolls a d100 and gets a total of 55. The GM then rolls a d10 for damage and adds the rogue's strength characteristic of 3 and the damage dealt by the weapon of 2 for a total of 8 damage dealt to the goblin. The goblins, unable to withstand the combined might of the adventurers, are quickly defeated. The group searches the cave and discovers a chest filled with gold and precious gems. Overall, this is an example of how combat works in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, with players rolling characteristics and weapon skill to determine success and damage. The GM acting as the referee and determining the outcome of the rolls. Okay, this isn't bad. It's perhaps a little bit laboured in places, but clearly ChatGPT understands that it uses a percentile system, it understands there's a weapon skill, strength characteristics, things like that. I think it's got the gist of the system. It seems to be, I think, sort of blending it a little bit with standard D&D tropes. In Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, one of the key sort of defining features of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is that you don't have classes in the same way you do in Dungeons and Dragons. You have careers, and you have like a career progression where you can start as like a rat catcher and then you can exit that career and become like, I don't know, a bounty hunter or something. And effectively that's how you kind of build your character up over time. Obviously, ChatGPT does not appear to be aware of that. It's not entirely surprising. Again, I think these kind of like deeper mechanics, it's asking a lot for ChatGPT to really understand them. It's going to tend to be flooded out by just sort of D&D-isms because D&D is so prominent and so prevalent. But I don't think it really matters too much. It's probably just something to be aware of if you're going to try and use ChatGPT to generate content. More important than its general understanding of the system, I think, is its understanding of the setting and the details of the setting and the tone of the story. So let's move on and generate an interesting NPC the players might be traveling with, provide a short backstory referencing some interesting locations within Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. Name: Greta Ironfist. Race: Dwarf. Background: Greta Ironfist is a fierce and experienced warrior from the mountain holds of Karak Aragaz. She has fought against the Greenskins and the Chaos Hordes in the World's Edge Mountains for most of her life. She was part of the expedition to reclaim Karak 8 Peaks from the Skaven, and was one of the few survivors of that doomed venture. Greta is known for her bravery and her hatred for Skaven. Equipment: Greta is armed with a finely crafted dwarven war axe, studded leather armour, and a shield bearing the crest of Karak Asgaraz. She carries a backpack containing rations and a bedroll, and a small amount of gold. Ability scores: we've got weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength, toughness, agility, intelligence, willpower, and fellowship. I think those are the correct abilities. Special abilities: dwarf. Greta has the special abilities of a dwarf, such as Dark Sight and Strike to Stun. Hatred of Skaven. Greta receives a +10 bonus to hit Skaven in combat. Very thematic. Sample dialogue: I'll not rest until every last one of those rat men is dead and buried. Mark my words, they'll rue the day they crushed Greta Ironfist. fair play. I like Greta Iron Fist. A decent character. The style, the theming is very Warhammer, which I think is a great sign. The ability scores, I mean, it's the correct ability scores. I'm not entirely sure about the values that have been assigned there. Also, there's no career or anything like that. So this is a good outline for a character. It's a good way of kind of generating ideas for a character and rooting them in the world. But the GM's definitely going to have to do a bit more work than you might have to do in D&D, at least based on this initial test. And it may be possible, of course, with a little bit more prompting to get ChatGPT to be more specific and more correct to the system. But overall, I'm pretty impressed. I like Greta. She sounds like a proper badass. And of course, finally, we have to create our encounter in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition for a group of new players who stumble upon a creature or creatures attacking someone on the road while travelling between towns. The group of adventurers is travelling on the road between the towns of Altdorf and Nuln, both of which are located in the Empire, the most powerful and populous nation of the Old World. Altdorf is the capital of the Empire and home to the Emperor himself, while Nuln is known for its impressive artillery and engineers. As they make their way down the road, they see in the distance a commotion on the road ahead. As they get closer, they see a merchant carriage under attack by a pack of vicious beasts. The creatures attacking the carriage are chaos warhounds, large mutated dogs that have been twisted by the powers of chaos. They have a mottled, diseased-looking fur and a set of razor-sharp teeth. They have been sent to stop the merchant from reaching Nuln, as he carries important information that would turn the tide of an upcoming battle. The group must act quickly to save the merchant and his guards from the warhounds. Chaos Warhounds, pack of 4. We've got weapon skill, no ballistic skill, good. Strength, toughness, agility, intelligence, willpower, fellowship. Again, I think actually a pretty good stat line this time. Special abilities, fear 1. Anyone seeing the Warhounds must take a fear test. Diseased bite. Anyone bitten by a Warhound must take a toughness test or become infected with a disease. Ooh. I hope it's not Nurgle's rot. Mutations. Each Warhound has a random mutation. Cool, very cool. Loot. The merchant is carrying a chest of gold coins and a valuable letter that could change the outcome of a war. Each Warhound has a value of 25 gold crowns if sold to a beastmaster or alchemist. This encounter is meant to challenge the players, but also provide them with valuable information and resources to continue their journey. It is also a good opportunity for them to test their combat abilities and work together as a team to overcome the obstacles in their path. The theming here, the story, the ideas it generates, really good. Again, it clearly understands the system. This is not entirely surprising. I mean, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and the old world is going to have a huge amount written about it online, and presumably a lot of that will have made its way into the training data. So it's probably, of the systems out there, the alternatives to D&D, it's going to be one of those that ChatGPT really knows the most about and really knows inside out, which is, I think, really cool and exciting. So there you have it. 2 fantastic alternatives to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If indeed you are thinking right now that you want to perhaps withdraw your support from Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro due to the ongoing debacle of their public relations and their attempts to deauthorize OGL 1.0a, then you could go a lot further wrong than checking out one of these 2 systems. And it seems like ChatGPT is still going to be very good at generating content for you and helping you as a games master to take your game to the next level. And indeed, if you're not particularly familiar with the settings for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay or Pathfinder, then ChatGPT could be an invaluable source of information and assistance when creating your adventures. That said, if you're familiar with either of these 2 systems and you've seen anything which you think stands out as being particularly wrong, do let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. It's been a long time since I played Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and I've literally only just started playing Pathfinder. Please do remember to do the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff which feeds the mighty YouTube dragon so that it might deign to gift attention upon these humble videos. But until next time, thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and I'll see you later.